Welcome everyone to today's AMWA-MAC webinar titled From Guidance to Practice, Empowering Patients Through Meaningful Engagement and Informed Consent. We're so glad that you could join us today. My name is Andrea Clark and I am a manager of regulatory medical writing at Aroga Biosciences and the AMWA-MAC membership and volunteer coordinator, and I'll be your host for today's session. The Mid-Atlantic chapter is one of 15 chapters of the American Medical Writers Association, which is the leading professional organization for writers, editors, and other communicators of medical information. The AMWA Mid-Atlantic chapter includes Maryland, Virginia, DC, and the eastern part of West Virginia. Our mission is to promote excellence in medical communication and to provide educational resources in support of that goal. Today, we will be diving into the topic of patient centricity in clinical research, a subject that is especially relevant to medical communicators. Whether you are here to learn about FDA guidance on this topic, improve patient engagement, or write ICFs using patient-centered approaches, you are in the right place. A few housekeeping notes. This webinar will last approximately 1 hour. Please feel free to submit your questions in the chat box. We will have time for a Q&A session at the end. And yes, the session will be recorded and we will share the recording and slides with participants afterwards. I would like to introduce you to our first speaker, Samantha Winders, a regulatory medical writer at Aroga Biosciences. Samantha is dedicated to advancing symptom management and enhancing scientific communication. She has a background in academic scientific research and holds a PhD in nursing science from the University of Florida. I would also like to introduce our second speaker, Marialena Davis, a regulatory medical writer at Aroga Biosciences. Marialena is passionate about writing for the patient. She has presented to the global medical community and is leading an internal training initiative at Aroga Biosciences on patient-centric ICFs. With that, I will hand it over to Samantha and Marialena.
Thank you, Andrea. So hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining today. So before we start, this is our disclosure statement. So all the views and opinions expressed in the following PowerPoint slides are our own and not attributed to AMWA and its affiliates. So this presentation will be 2 parts, and then at the end we'll have questions. So for part 1, I'll be discussing how we can enhance patient engagement and clinical trial design with FDA guidance.
And in part 2, we're going to discuss how to write patient-centric informed consent forms in order to enhance patient understanding, engagement, and trust. And then we'll have time for questions.
So for the first part, the learning objectives are to define patient centricity and the benefits of a patient-centric design. And then we'll go into the FDA's patient-focused drug development guidance series that aims to incorporate patient perspectives in medical product development and regulatory decisions. And then I'll discuss strategies to incorporate a patient-centric approach into clinical research, and I'll discuss some case studies, so a patient advisory group I was involved in, and then how social media could be used.
The part 2 learning objectives include what is the informed consent form or ICF, how do patients view ICFs. We're going to also discuss the purpose of the FDA finalized guidance and draft guidance for ICFs. And finally, we're going to discuss ways that we as medical writers can write better ICFs using patient-centered approaches.
We'll start off with what is patient centricity. So there are varying definitions out there on what patient centricity is, but at its core, it is ensuring patient voices and needs are at the center of their healthcare. So it is the ability to see beyond the data into the patient's lived experience. And in order to understand the patient's lived experience, we need to adopt a holistic approach. So that is considering any individual, interpersonal, institutional, community, or even policy factors that may influence their health. So now that we've established the foundation of patient centricity, let's take a closer look at the key components. So patient centricity includes patient advocacy, patient experience, patient engagement, and then all of these are intricately related to health equity. So patient advocacy is partnering with patient organizations to amplify the patient voice and address their needs. And then we have patient experience, which is the patient's subjective experience of interacting with the product, company, and support. And then patient engagement is that two-way interaction between an organization and patients or even advocacy groups to gain insights into the patient perspective. And we can involve them in decisions and co-create products and services. And like I said, they're all intricately related to health equity, which is ensuring fair and equal access to care for all patients. Now, why is this important? So this brings us to the principle of nothing about me without me, which is a core principle of person-centered care and decision-making, and also the rallying cry of patient advocacy groups. So the bottom line is the true value of a product or patient solution is defined by those who will ultimately use it, and that is the patients themselves. So we need to give them a seat at the table, and this allows them to be co-creators in the design process, and it helps us include endpoints that are clinically meaningful to patients. And then we can also understand their benefit risk trade-offs. So a patient-centric design has several benefits, both for sponsors and patients. So for sponsors, it can exceed planned timelines, and it can lead to fewer substantial amendments, and this can improve timelines and reduce costs in the long run. And then it can lead to fewer substantial protocol deviations, improving operational efficiency. And for patients, the benefits include empowering patients to actively participate in clinical development, and it can improve the patient experience by reducing burden and strengthening patient outcomes. So the FDA has made engaging patients a priority with their PFDD guidance series. So this is the Patient-Focused Drug Development Series. It ensures that patients' perspectives, needs, and experiences are meaningfully considered in drug development activities. And there's 4 documents in this series. I'll go over a brief overview of each document, and then we'll go into more detail on guidance 1 and 2 in the next slides. So guidance 1 was finalized in June 2020. And this document focuses on really defining the target population. So whom do you get input from and why? And then how can you collect information from this population? So developing a sampling strategy. And the second document was finalized in February 2022. And this document focuses on what to ask and why, and then it goes over the best research practices to do so. And then the third document was finalized in June 2022. And this document focuses on what to measure and how, including selecting or developing those fit-for-purpose clinical outcome assessments. And then guidance 4 was finalized in April 2023. And this document focuses on how you can implement those outcomes into a clinical trial. So using your data to incorporate endpoints into your protocol. So guidance 1 defines patient experience data, which includes the experiences, perspectives, needs, and priorities of patients. So that can be the disease symptoms that they experience, the impact that the disease has on their day-to-day functioning and quality of life, the burden related to their disease symptoms, and even the burden related to their treatment, and then their preferences for treatment, including their view of potential trade-offs between disease outcomes and then the treatment benefits and risks. So this data, it can be collected through clinical trials, observational studies, advisory boards, public meetings, and other novel settings like social media or even online patient communities. And this can be through quantitative methods, so like surveys, and qualitative methods such as interviews or a combination of both. So you can use these methods to gather input from patients on your draft study plans, inclusion and exclusion criteria, any recruitment barriers, endpoints, survey language, any follow-up options you may have, and even preferred language the community prefers, such as person-first language or identity-first language. And no matter the approach you take, it should be a systematic approach throughout the life cycle of drug development. So you need to involve patients early and often. So now diving into an example of how patient experience data can be collected. Um, I'll share a case study of a patient advisory group I was involved in. So this patient advisory group was developed for an IBD study. And for those unfamiliar with IBD, stands for inflammatory bowel disease. And this is an umbrella term for a group of chronic diseases that cause inflammation in the GI tract. And it includes Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. So the study I was involved in was a comprehensive self-management for IBD study. So we were looking at an 8-session intervention on IBD self-management. And despite the importance of patient advisory groups to patient centricity, we found that there was really a lack of literature on using them in IBD research. So we created a patient advisory group in hopes to gather input from these patients to improve this study. So this group, it ended up being a small group. It was 10 members and 3 researchers. Members were not participants in the CSM IBD study, and we recruited them through local GI clinics and an IBD nonprofit organization. So we sent out an email invitation, and this included what their role would be, any time commitment, what's in it for me section, and any next steps if they decided to participate. And our goal was to recruit diverse members with varied clinical trial experiences, disease histories, and demographics. So the way the meetings were set up, we decided to do virtual meetings. We had them quarterly, and ahead of time we sent out a scheduling email so participants could select a preferred date and time so we could get as many attendees as possible. And then if they attended, they received a $50 gift card per meeting. And then during the meeting, the researcher moderated it, and the agenda included introductions, any expectations for that meeting, study updates from the previous meeting, and a topic discussion. And you can see down here, some of the topics we included were focused on symptom tracking, stool sample collection, which was a big part of the study, and recruitment and retention methods, etc. And then after the meeting, we sent out meeting notes to participants within 1 week. So an example of how the first meeting went. So the stool sample collection, like I said, is a big part of the IBD study. They were going to be collecting samples at the beginning and the end of the study. So we wanted to decrease any patient burden associated with this. So they discussed their best and worst stool sample collection experiences as a group, and the group they identified the issue with difficulties using the small collection devices that come with the stool sample container and the wooden tongue depressors, as you can see on the right-hand side. It made it difficult to collect their samples, so we decided on an alternative collection device using a large sterile spoon. And then some other items that they identified that might be helpful was a trash bag, gloves, and hand sanitizer. So after the meeting, the researchers, we decided on including the alternative spoon, and we made the changes to the study. And at the next meeting, we discussed those changes and presented them to the group. And they really did feel like their input mattered after they saw that we incorporated the changes into the study. So, in order to evaluate the group, we sent out an anonymous survey after 9 months of participation. And the survey was based on a modified public and patient engagement evaluation tool. So it included questions on the 5-point Likert scale. So as you can see down below, they would rate the questions based from strongly disagree to strongly agree. And then we also included open-ended questions to assess engagement. So some of the questions included their understanding of the group, meeting accessibility, if they felt heard, if they felt that there were a diverse amount of viewpoints shared, etc. And as you can see on the right-hand side, the group was very motivated to help others and improve research. And they really did understand the value of the patient experience in IBD research. And then for the diversity and representation, they did feel that there were a variety of thoughts and experience in the group. They enjoyed the partnerships. For the purposeful engagement, like I said, they really enjoyed hearing how we took their input and incorporated it into the study. And then also, they enjoyed the compensation. And then some other positives of the group was um, a supportive environment, peer support, and meeting accessibility. And then some improvements to the group that they mentioned. The group size was too large for some. So we did have 10 members, so maybe having a smaller group size would be helpful. Some did have difficulties with the online format, so maybe having an in-person option would also be helpful. And then needs for improvements in communication. So, like I said, we did have virtual meetings, so maybe having that in-person meeting might help with communication, or having a phone number or an email that was always monitored, that could help with communication. So for another example of how patient experience data can be collected is through social media. And that can be through observing how patients use social media and what they discuss, or even using it as a recruitment tool. You can reach a wide audience, as you can see, as of October 2024. An estimated 5.2 billion people globally used social media. So this does offer opportunities to share information, build community support, and spread awareness. And so you can really gain a visual of the patient experience. So what do they care about most? Where do their frustrations exist, and what are their benefit risk trade-offs? And that could be looking at Instagram, YouTube, Reddit, Twitter, TikTok, or even blog posts. So our IBD group looked into how IBD patients were using TikTok through a descriptive content analysis. So we aim to assess the content reliability and quality of the top 100 TikTok videos on IBD. And we found there were 8 common themes discussed in these videos, with the most common being ostomy, disease management, and advocacy. So this is just one example of how social media can be a useful tool in visualizing the patient experience and identifying their potential needs. Now I'll pass it over to Marialena for how we can apply a patient-centric approach to informed consent forms.
Thank you, Samantha. Another important way to support patients and enhance study participation is by making the ICF more patient-centric. So before we discuss the ways that in which we can achieve this, let's first revisit the history of the informed consent. So the concept of the informed consent began in 1947 with the Nuremberg Code, which established voluntary consent as an ethical requirement for research involving human participants in response to unethical experimentation performed in prisoners during World War II. In 1964, the Declaration of Helsinki further emphasized the need for voluntary and informed participation in research and set the ethical standards for physicians conducting research. The US National Research Act in 1974 was a turning point. It made the ICF mandatory for most federally funded studies and created the IRBs. The Belmont Report was published in 1979 and shaped the federal regulations and formed the Common Rule, which is the heart of the consent form. The Common Rule is a comprehensive set of federal regulations that govern research involving human participants, and it's based in 3 ethical principles: respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. So what is the ICF? This is the table of contents from a sample ICF, and let's go through those contents. So it includes an overview and key information about the study, a statement that participation is completely voluntary, why is the study being done, the purpose of the study, and what are the risks and benefits during the study, what exams, tests, and procedures that the participant will undergo, what are the costs involved, what happens if someone is injured during the study, and whom the participant can contact if he has any questions about the rights or about the study. And finally, it includes a signatory page where the participant can sign if he agrees to participate in the study. But what is the purpose of the ICF? It is really a tool for an ongoing communication process and serves the ethical imperative of respect for persons. It also ensures that the potential participants have all the information they need in order to make their informed decision about taking part in the study. But how do patients view the ICF? So this data is taken from a study published in 2022, where they looked at participant perception of the ICF by literacy level. This included 3 literacy levels. The first one was 4th to 6th grade. That was the low literacy level. Here I just have to say that this group only included 1 participant. Then there was a moderate literacy level, including 7th to 8th grade education, and the high literacy level was high school education. So when the participants were handed the ICF, they all felt like they were expected to read that document, and they didn't seem to have any issue with the font size. However, the majority of the participants felt like the ICFs were too wordy. And what is very interesting is that almost all the participants did not trust the medical team to fully explain the research to them, but they relied on reading the ICF on their own. Although the majority of the participants didn't feel like the ICF had served a legal purpose, and it seemed like it's understandable and easy to read, most of the participants did not find it very informative. So these findings highlight the need for clear, meaningful, and respectful ICFs. And in response to this, the FDA has issued guidance documents in order to respond to those issues. And the original guidance was issued in 1998, but this one mostly relied on compliance, and it made the ICFs look more like a legal formality rather than a meaningful communication tool. And this is why in August 2023, new guidance was finalized, and this introduced key elements such as plain language and voluntary participation. And adding into this, into making it even more patient-centered, there is a draft guidance issued in March 2024 that focuses on a key information section, and it really explains how you could organize this information to facilitate understanding of informed consent. And we're going to discuss this in a minute. So how can we make ICFs more patient-centered? The answer lies in three things: context, word choice, and visuals. Before discussing strategies for writing better ICFs, let's see how a good ICF, a bad ICF compares to a good ICF. So a bad ICF will be non-patient-centric. It will be written in complex scientific language, and the information will be organized in long and dense paragraphs with no breaks in between, and the tone will be legalistic and impersonal. And a list of specific risks about the study will be missing. In contrast, a good ICF will be patient-centric, will be written in simple and clear language. The information will be organized in short sections with the use of headings and bullet points. The tone will be friendly and engaging, and a clear list of risks will be included. And this will include risks associated with the medicine and risks associated with the procedures involved, and also they can also be grouped as more severe and less severe risks. An important update from the finalized FDA guidance in 2023 is the use of headings is the use of questions as headings. So if we look at the original 1998 guidance, the headings were single-worded, for example, purpose, duration, procedures. But now the new guidance recommends to change these headings into meaningful questions to the patient. For example, why is the study being done? How long will I be taking part in this study? What type of tests or procedures will be involved? And another important element here is the key information section, which was introduced in 2024. And this information section aligns with a revised common rule, which requires consent information to begin with a concise and focused presentation of the key information. So as you can see, those boxes here include this key information, and these boxes are taken directly from the appendix of the draft guidance. And what the guidance really tells you is how to, it's an example of how you could put this information together and how to organize. And you can use boxes or balloons or any form that you feel like can make it more patient-friendly and more readable and more clear. And you can see here, you need to include information like what the patient should know before reading the document, a statement that voluntary participation, that the participation is completely voluntary, what is the research about, risks, benefits, procedures, duration of the study, alternatives, cost-related information, and any additional information. So basically, it's a summary of the whole ICF, but the purpose is to give all this information upfront to make the patient decide whether he's going to continue or not reading the remaining ICF. So we spoke about the context. Let's move on into word choice. So there are some words that can have multiple meanings. For example, the word poor can mean low income or low quality. Similarly, the word prevent can mean stop something or reduce the chance of something. So if we use those words, this can really be misleading to the patient. And that's why using the right word matters in order to communicate to the participant the right message. And we as medical writers focus on the scientific aspect of the ICF, but we also need to take into account the emotional aspect, because there are words that can provoke negative emotions. For example, the medical term chronic, which means long duration. In the common use, it can mean severe or never ending. And this can be really scary to the patient and make him hesitant in agreeing to participate in the study. And being specific matters. Let's see the example of the word better. What does that mean? So in the medical world, it could mean that drug X is more effective in reducing tumor size, for example, compared to existing similar therapies. But the word better in this context is, the meaning is really vague. So the patient may think like, oh, this better means that it's going to cure my cancer, or I may experience fewer side effects, or it will relieve my symptoms. Therefore, being specific builds trust between the patient and the study team. Voluntary participation is a key element introduced in the finalized guidance in 2023. And how can we include the statement and make it patient-centered? Let's first see how we would phrase that based on language based on the original 1998 FDA guidance. So the subject must understand the study's risks and benefits prior to participation and must consent without undue influence. So this seems too legal and feels like it adds a lot of pressure to the patient in order to agree to participate and sign. So if we take into account the updated guidance, we can write this. We want to make sure you fully understand the potential benefits and risks of the study so you can make an informed choice. Your participation is completely voluntary. You can choose to leave the study at any time. So the words completely voluntary and choose give the power of choice to the patient. Another way to improve clarity introduced by the finalized guidance is the use of visuals. So an example of that is the use of tables. For example, if you want to explain the study procedures, if there are too many or they're complex, you can put them together in a table as in this example here, and also include the timing of each procedure, and that makes it more clear, understandable, and patient-friendly. And similarly, you could use a flow chart. And this is especially useful if you want to explain a study design that is complex. For example, here, you can say you will participate in one of 3 study groups. Group 1, you will receive 25 milligrams of non-snacking. Group 2, you will receive 50 milligrams of non-snacking. And group 3, you will receive 25 milligrams placebo. I want to stay here on the word placebo. So a lot of patients do not know what that means. So we always have to give an explanation about placebo, and we could write something like, it looks like a study drug, but has no effect, or it looks like the study medicine, but it's not medicine. So let's summarize how we can write more effective and patient-centric ICFs. Always use plain language and try to avoid scientific terms. Organize the information in a clear, logical way and provide ample white space and try to keep it as short as possible. It's recommended not to exceed 15 pages in total. Focus on key points that are meaningful to the patient, and if possible, use visual aids to make it more readable. And it's very important to seek patient feedback, and you can do that through advocacy groups. So finally, I wanted to share a useful tool for when you write ICFs and you need to use plain language. So there is a clinical research glossary that has been developed by the multi-regional clinical trials of Brigham and Women's Hospital in Harvard. And this is an example here for letter A. There are different medical terms that are converted into plain language definitions. And this is an open project that anyone can help. They put together about 30 words every year in this website. And it's a very, very nice effort. And it's very, very useful for us as medical writers in order to make the ICFs more patient-centric.
So to summarize our presentation today, we first looked at what patient centricity is, and this objective of a patient-centric approach is to address patient needs, improve engagement, reduce burden, and ultimately that can expedite drug approval. And we can do that through using patient advisory groups, which are a valuable way to incorporate patient perspectives into clinical trials by fostering that collaboration among patients, clinicians, and researchers. And then the other method would be social media, and this can offer insights from patient communities for trial design and recruitment.
And we discussed patient-centric writing, specifically using plain language and patient feedback to create clear and accessible clinical trial documents. And we give the example of the ICF, where we can prioritize the meaningful content by addressing what patients want and what they need to know, and tailor the ICFs in such a way to enhance understanding through context, correct word choice, and visuals. Here are some references if you are interested into looking more from what we talked. And here's our contact information if you want to drop any questions. And thank you for your attention, and we're open to questions.
Thank you both for that insightful presentation. We've learned a lot of valuable information, and now it's time to hear from you, our audience. We'll now open the floor for your questions. If you haven't already, please feel free to type your questions into the chat box. And while we're waiting for questions to come in, I can get us started with a question for each speaker. Samantha, how can we as medical writers incorporate patient input into clinical trial documents?
So I think that the ICH M11 protocol template, it does have a section, it's section 411. It offers an opportunity to write in any patient input that you gathered that helped develop the protocol. I think that's one way that we can take the patient experience data and add it to the protocol. And then another way would be plain language summaries. So the EU CTIS, their initiative is to make clinical trials more transparent. So that can be through plain language summaries, and other countries are using the EU model as well to be more transparent with clinical trial results.
Thank you for that answer. Now a question for Marialena. How does the FDA guidance on ICF compare to the ICH guidance?
So the FDA guidance really focuses on using the plain language, how to use it, also introduces the element of key information. It really focuses on how to make it readable and clear. You can use figures, you can use tables, but the ICH doesn't take this into account. They state that it states that it has to be clear, but all these patient-centric approaches are not included. And it focuses more into giving more information about how confidentiality will be included and how the samples will be stored, rather than talking about how this patient-centric approach will be implemented.
Thank you for that answer. Do we have any questions from the audience? We can give everyone another minute or so to drop any questions. And if there are no questions from the audience at this time, we do have the speaker contact information in the slide deck. Okay, we have a question from the audience. How do you approach writing the key information section of the consent form without repeating too much from the body of the form?
You don't repeat the details, so it's very high level, and you need to just include like just the message. It's a summary of the content, basically, it's a summary of every heading that you've included in, and it's just like the most important point. You don't include everything so that you don't repeat it, unless it's necessary to repeat something.
Thank you for that answer, Marialena. Do we have any other questions from the audience? We'll give everyone another minute to get any questions in. What is the best time to engage with patients for protocol development, especially with the M11 template?
Yeah, I think definitely early in the process. So as soon as you start, as soon as you identify your patient population, I think you should be in contact with participants. So before you get your protocol out, to avoid any amendments later on, you want to make sure that it's going to be useful for the patients and not cause any burden. So yeah, definitely early is like the first few steps you do.
Thank you for that answer. And we have another question. Do you have experience engaging patients in the development of consent forms too?
Not really at the moment. At the moment, I believe like everyone is just trying to implement those key updates from the guidance into the ICF. There is very good response from the companies that we work for when we write from our clients, although sometimes they are questioning like the legal parts that have to be reviewed by legal teams, but generally we like it. Not yet. That's the answer about how to get it.
Thank you for that answer, Marialena. Do we have any more questions from the audience? We have some great questions that have come in already. You can keep the chat box open for another minute or so, see if any last questions come in. All right, since we don't have any more questions from the audience, thank you all for your fantastic questions and engagement in today's session. And a big thank you again to Samantha and Marialena for sharing their insights on this topic. If you would like to revisit anything, we will be sharing a recording of this webinar. Definitely stay connected with the AMWA Mid-Atlantic chapter on LinkedIn, and we will hopefully see you at our next event. Have a great day, everyone.